Thank you. Yeah, it's time for something a bit different now. One of the aims, as Phil's already said, when we were first thinking about this session, the Finds group, it's a combination of various proposals that have been put together. And the Finds group, we were planning on building on a session last year that the New Generation group organised when you had people who work in environmental studies particularly, relating how they became specialists to help people who were thinking of going into that field to develop their career. So this talk has come about from conversations within the Finds group about not just recounting our own personal journeys, but what we've learned on the way that people who want to become specialists might actually find useful, particularly those thinking of going into working in the commercial sector. And hopefully it will trigger some conversations in the networking session after this. So, there we go, discussion points. I'm going to be talking about these three things: definition of a specialist, different pathways, different routes to becoming a specialist, and also look at some of the demographics, who are the specialists at the moment. My background, just very briefly, is I am a finds specialist. I've worked for about 20 years commercially for various large commercial organisations. I've worked freelance for Historic England, currently work for a local authority, and I'm primarily a Romano-British ceramic specialist. So although I'm talking about specialists in general, I am really talking about find specialists, and also a lot of it's relevant to people who work in conservation and environmental studies. And I had to put Father Jack in here because when you start working as a specialist, one of the things that you'll very quickly realise is that is how most project managers will see you as a specialist, as in your objects are the best objects and take priority over every other aspect of the project. It's not true. Okay. So first of all, if we start by what do we mean by what is a specialist? This definition is taken from the Standard for Pottery Studies in Archaeology. I think it's, it basically defines a specialist. And although it refers to pottery, I think you can replace the word pottery with pretty much any other material. And why is it important to define what a specialist is? Standards, really. It's all about standards, maintaining standards. A recent survey by the Finds Group, funded by Historic England, affectionately known as Project 1790. That rings bells with anybody? Yeah, there we go. But basically that project, you can find it online, I've got a reference at the end, looked at the standards of recording of archaeological artefacts in finds reports. And one of the findings, it became quite clear through the results and also from anecdotal comments from curators and various other people, that quite often you find cutting corners, either to do with time or finances, but you do find that junior staff or staff not fully experienced enough are quite often asked for finds reports, typically on classes of materials such as maybe glass or clay pipe, things that are deemed as maybe not as important as the pottery, which gives you the date. But the problem with that is it leads to a fall in the standards, it affects the resulting data set and how compatible that is, how usable it is. And also, it's a pretty unfair situation to put somebody in who's starting out in a career. You want to build their confidence, not ask them to do something that they maybe don't feel confident enough to do, unless you provide some kind of mentoring support for that person. And one of the hardest things you find when you start as a new specialist is actually having the confidence to say no when you're asked to do something that you maybe don't feel quite suitably qualified to do. So what is a specialist? How do you prove or know that you've reached that specialist competence level? Developed expertise, reports in peer-reviewed sources, and the publication record is probably still the ultimate demonstration of having reached that status. And again, I won't go into too much detail here, but as a specialist as well, when you start producing reports, there's you produce the report, and sometimes there can be a bit of a falling down in when you actually see that report from when you hand it over to when it's actually been edited and then published. You have to be on the ball to make sure that actually you do get to see that report before it actually comes out with your name on. because it might bear little resemblance. So peer-reviewed sources, being able to demonstrate that you can work unsupervised, obviously. Membership of relevant study groups, that's a really important one. It provides a link to other researchers, it involves you in the discussions on standards and issues common across that subject area. And some obviously specialist areas are quite small, you may be talking about tens of people. And it also provides a source of informal mentors and also formal accreditation and recognition of competence. So through CIFA, for example, accreditation competence, a bit of a hot topic this week with the Chartered Archaeologist vote. But each of the specialist interest groups in CIFA have produced a set of competence matrices, and those show the level of experience and expertise specialists should have reached to go through each of those different phases of membership. So if you're looking at what you need to do, you're planning your CPD, they actually provide a really good resource. And these days it's quite possible to achieve member status within 5 years or so. So how do you get there? Okay, accredited funds group. How do you get there? Traditional route is still an undergraduate degree, usually followed by a master's and or a PhD. There are some specialist master's courses. I think the Conservatives, quite often it's a master's course at Durham or UCL, and there's various post-excavation masters, such as the one at Leicester. And many degrees, the emphasis is still primarily on, they're still research focused, maybe preparing people to go on and do a PhD. Not many actually provide specialist knowledge that you need to then go and work in a commercial setting. Not many provide opportunities to practice producing, for example, post-excavation assessments or evaluation reports and publication reports, and they all require a slightly different emphasis and slightly different levels of recording. Access to the initial training can be difficult and expensive, but also so can accessing CPD courses. And CPD relates both to technical skills and the knowledge that you need as a specialist to deliver your specialism, and also the skills you need to train and mentor others. So it's not just knowing your material, but knowing how to then apply that knowledge in a commercial setting. Heritage apprenticeships. This is a new one. There are 6 under development, I think, at the moment, really, under the Historic Environment Trailblazers group. Is that the right? Yeah. One of which is a level 7 archaeological specialist. So this is a postgraduate degree level apprenticeship. It offers work-based learning through an employer with an additional university element. I think it's 20% off the job training with the university, and the rest is with your employer. My understanding at the moment is the standards haven't yet been approved, but they're not far off, should be within the next couple of months. And then it'll be looking for assessors and people who can provide the training, so higher education, whether that's university or HE colleges, few colleges. But then hopefully they should be available by the end of the year, and those offer a fantastic opportunity for people who are maybe already working within a commercial organisation to get that proper fines training, that mentoring, proper structured training. And obviously it's a good opportunity for employers to be able to upskill their staff. I've mentioned mentoring a few times, work-based mentoring, and can't emphasise enough how valuable that is in developing a specialism. Jane Goodall here. Find a mentor. Okay, it's not as easy as it sounds. Many specialists now work freelance, and that gives freelance specialists have a bit of a dilemma here, because if you take on an apprentice as much as you'd like to, there's genuine fear that they're creating competition and losing work by doing so. But at the same time, there is a need to share that knowledge and that experience that's been built up. I mean, when I started in the mid-1990s, there was very little formal training for people who wanted to work as a fine specialist. And I know my peers share as well. We have a lot of gratitude to specialists of the generation before us who actually provided a lot of unofficial mentoring. I think we all try and return that favour, but working practices doesn't always make it easy. So how do you know I'm not making all this up? Survey of Archaeological Specialists. Now, if you've got any questions, Kenny is in the room at the end. It's based on one of the surveys that Kenny did. And you've probably all heard of the profiling profession and the archaeological market surveys that have been done. There have been quite a few now. But they don't necessarily delve sufficiently into the situation for specialists. So this was the third survey of this type that looked at specialists, and it complements those broader surveys. Identified 13 broad specialist areas. So those included archaeological find study, which was pottery, CBM, clay pipe, work stone, organic materials. Also things like buildings, history, conservation, historical research, paleo-environmental study, photography, physical dating, survey. It's very broad-ranging. Over 1,200 responses. Those concerned with buildings and gardens were separated out for a separate review. 882 responses, of which 303 related specifically to archaeological find study. And I think if you look at the last archaeological market survey, put about 4,900 archaeologists working commercially. So I think that 303 puts us at around about 6%, but within that, obviously, pottery specialists are going to be an even smaller percentage. And as you can see here, I've already mentioned that we're a graduate profession, and the survey found that almost 77% of those responding had a master's or higher degree, and that was felt by the respondents to be quite important for people who wanted to become specialists. Although most work for other organisations, that figure again relates to all specialists, not just find specialists. And I think if you were to break that down even further, you'd see that a lot of find specialists, a much higher percentage, actually work as freelancers. And the charge-out rates. Yeah, if you want to work as a find specialist, maybe you might want to consider survey, or sort of think if you're interested in the money. Very broad range. And related to that, you find that it's quite interesting. The overall average is 259 per day, but the average fines is 218 per day. And that's not much really when you think about as a freelancer. That's got to cover obviously tax, national insurance, things, unpaid leave. We're not really charging for our services the way we should, I don't think. And rather alarmingly, it also revealed that charge-out rates for male specialists was higher than for female specialists, and also part-time specialists tended to be charged out, or full-time specialists tended to be charged out at a higher rate than part-time. And I don't know if there's a correlation between the two there, or I don't know, I suspect there may be. If you're interested in things to do with gender pay gaps, that sort of information, Hannah Cobb, who's based at the University of Manchester, has done some really good work on that, so that's the research to look for. So who are we? Average age of an archaeological specialist, 47, as opposed to an archaeologist, which is 41. More specialists are female. That's maybe not surprising, given that the research is showing that there's a higher proportion of women entering the profession than there are men. However, women are also more likely to leave the profession before the age of 40. Though again, I suspect that might be different with find study, because it probably is one of the most family-friendly options if you're thinking of career in archaeology. Ethnically, we're not very diverse, and we have very low rates of declared disabilities as well. And probably the last 2 points there are of most interest to those of you in the room who are thinking of going into finds work. There's not very many of us now, and there's going to be even less of us in about 10 years. So in terms of workforce planning, it's quite a good one to go for. So, if you still want to be a specialist, what I did there's more cats. Let's go with the last presentation. You always got a cat in there. It's one of the pitfalls of working freelance, actually, if you've got pets, is they will find your desk and they will find your box of pots and they will try and scatter your shirts. But I asked a lot of other specialists, if you had one bit of advice to give to people who are maybe finishing their PhDs and thinking of going into find study, what would you say? Get the experience in, volunteer if need be, and quite a few people were saying portable antiquities scheme. Volunteer with them. We're not talking pot washing here. We're actually, work alongside find specialists. Get a feel for the type of material, what they do. Is this really something that you want to do? Because I also think as well it's quite hard when you go from doing your own research to working commercially. You don't really get to do any research. You're churning out reports constantly, and you have to produce reports in a format that then will enable other people to do the research on the material that you've recorded, which I think can come as quite a bit of a shock. You do need fieldwork. You know, if you're reporting on finds, you need to understand depositional processes. You need to understand what's going on. I've already said link in with the specialist interest groups, find a mentor, look for work-based learning, and you know, specialist work. You know, it is a good career within archaeology. You know, it does offer flexible working options. You get to see an amazing amount of material, and it's very, very rewarding. So, there you go, thank you. There's some links up there. Like I said, it's a very different talk to the ones we've already had to date, but I think Phil and I were hoping that it would trigger some conversations and the networking afterwards. It's a nice mix of people in the room, of people who are working commercially, people who are at museums, conservators, and people who are studying, so hopefully we can be of help. Okay, thank you.